How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Monitor Comics, the YouTube channel where we create comics and manga. In today's video, we will be going over everything you need to know about becoming a professional writer for comics, manga, and webtoons. Make sure you watch this video in its entirety because we will also be discussing how writers can find artists to work with, what needs to be in your writing portfolio, and how you can become a professional comic book writer. Joining me in today's video is Frederick Jones, the CEO of Saturday AM.
My name is Frederick Jones. I'm the founder and publisher of Saturday AM, the world's most diverse manga brand. I started the company with the idea to basically create a manga anthology and brand that spoke more deliberately to the growing audience base and very creative young people around the world who were growing up fans of manga but weren't really seeing themselves included in manga. I write Yellow Stringer. I created that for Jeffrey Jean-Louis, who's the artist. Massively Multiplayer World of Ghosts, which was the very first title Saturday AM had. Clock Striker, which is our biggest series outside of Apple Black. I'll be writing Saturday Wars, which is our upcoming crossover event. I have edited or played a big role on a number of titles.
You may recognize a few of Saturday AM's creators like White Manga, Jay Odin, Saigami Project, Fred Torninger, Arunas Art, and DD Mark. You can purchase Volume 1 of Yellow Stringer and Massively Multiplayer World of Ghosts right now in stores like Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Waterstones. You can pre-order Volume 1 of Clock Striker right now using the links in my description. All of Saturday AM's physical manga volumes can also be purchased through Amazon. Similar to magazines like Weekly Shonen Jump, Weekly Shonen Sunday, and Weekly Shonen Magazine, Saturday AM is an anthology of manga series created by artists from around the world. Saturday AM currently has 3 different magazines with over 150 issues. What did it take for Saturday AM to become what it is today?
You know, there were a lot of anthologies that came out when I was younger. There were DC Digest anthologies I used to get when I go visit my grandparents. Marvel would have these anthology magazines occasionally. My brother would turn me on to. So the idea of getting a comic and be able to have lots of content in it was fairly normal. And so when I was a kid, my mother had a word processing business. And in that era, especially as an African American, it was rare to live in any area where people had computers and had photocopiers and stuff. So I remember as a kid, I would put together these comic books. I would commission kids in my neighborhood to create comics. And I would go to my mom, I would get the comic pages in for them. I'd come to my mom, I'd copy them, I'd fold the paper in half and staple it, and I'd sell it for 25 cents. So between that and then later when I was in college, this camp I did where the kids created their own comics and stuff, all of that led me to this desire to create content in that vein, whether it's Saturday AM and Saturday PM and Saturday Brunch and all the things that we do. Obviously, as a professional and executive, I had worked on really big video game franchises in the marketing space and in the product launch space. So that had helped me as well understand the relationship between producing content and then having it reach both the retailer and the end user and what steps it takes to really attract both of them. We worked really hard to just take what we thought was important seriously. What I tell people all the time is that, I wasn't the first one that had the idea of creating a diverse or a more Western version of Shonen Jump. So it's one thing to talk about it, which is what so many people had done before. It's another thing to do it. And then it's another thing to not just do it one time, but to be committed to the idea of creating a diverse manga anthology and brand, which meant therefore you had to continually produce content. You couldn't try to produce every idea you had. You had to focus on whatever you thought the strongest idea was and really live up to the potential of having this one series as well as other series that other creators would have come out consistently. The first 5 years of Saturday AM, we came out every 2 weeks. So people don't know this, but every issue came out every 2 weeks. That's how we got to 100 issues really quickly. You couldn't really manufacture the relationship with the audience unless you proved to them that you were so committed by this that every single issue was going to come out on time. We released less issues of Saturday AM per year than we used to, but we also have another magazine called Saturday PM. We have another magazine called Saturday Brunch. We have the website experience called Saturday Afternoon, which is part of a website called Pilot Manga. And then we even have our original graphic novels through Quarto Group.
In my opinion, everyone can create comics, manga, and webtoons. At the end of the day, comics, manga, and webtoons are sequential art. Sequential art and storytelling are universal concepts that have existed in every culture and every time period. Online, I often hear the argument you can't make manga unless you are Japanese. In my honest opinion, I think that is just an excuse to gatekeep. Every artist takes inspiration from somewhere. Every comic, webcomic, manga, manhwa, and manfra are still sequential art. French artist Tony Valente had his series Radiant licensed by Viz Media and adapted into an anime series by the Japanese animation studio Lurch. Korean artist Youngji Park had his webtoon series The God of High School adapted into an anime series by the Japanese animation studio Mappa. And the American artist Monty Ohm had his animated web series Ruby adapted into an official anime series by the Japanese studio Shaft. It was also adapted into a manga series by the Japanese company Shueisha. Many industry professionals agree that comics, manga, manhwa, and manfra are all the same thing. For some reason though, Twitter users who have never made a comic before think they know more than the professionals in the industry. Aside from the artists that I just mentioned, a few years ago, Shonen Jump hosted an international manga competition to celebrate the Tezuka Awards' 100th anniversary. More recently, Shueisha created a comic hosting platform called Manga Plus Creators with Metabang, where artists from around the world can post their manga and compete for Japanese awards. Viz Media has even announced a portfolio review at New York Comic Con this year for Viz Media original manga. The reason that I bring this up is because I often see young artists being harassed online for drawing in the manga style. Twitter users comment on their posts that their work isn't real manga or will never be seen as manga. Nobody should be criticized for putting their heart and soul into their art. We all have a story to tell, so we should all be allowed to tell it however we want to.
Saturday AM is the home of independent, diverse manga. And so if you are a creator who wants to create manga and you're not Japanese, then we are that option. I remember when I first started really getting into Japanese culture, again, before the internet, I was getting hobby kits and I was reading magazines that were imported into America, like Animag. I was getting anime tapes from Japan. As I started putting together Saturday AM, later after meeting White and Raymond Brown, it just became more obvious to me that diversity was really the key. It was not just to say we're going to be non-Japanese people creating manga, but there were going to be non-Japanese people who are creating manga that was just like manga in the sense that it's authentic to who the creator is.
As many of you know, I am the writer and artist of a Saturday afternoon manga series Change the World. What this means is I am responsible for writing an ongoing story and creating the visuals for it. It is very common for independent comics and manga to be created by one person. However, it isn't uncommon for comics and manga to be created by two separate people. In Western comics, many superhero comics are created by artist-writer pairs. Popular manga series like Death Note, Dr. Stone, Food Wars, The Promised Neverland, Kakegurui, and Shugochara were created by artist-writer pairs.
So let's put it in perspective. I think when I created MWA, Master Book of the Ghost, I was very much involved with Yu-Gi-Oh!, played a role in helping to popularize Yu-Gi-Oh! In America through my involvement as an executive at Blockbuster Corporate with the magazine called Beckett Collector. We negotiated to bring it in, and it comes in, and it became a massive hit. I created MWA with this understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh! And wanting to see something that felt more representative. Obviously, diversity was a big deal to me. And so I started coming with this concept to kind of merge Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and Digimon and things of that nature with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I grew up mostly around South Asian kids, Indian kids, and I live near them now in North Carolina. When I was a kid, there weren't many black characters on shows. There were more, actually, than you think, but there weren't that many. But if you were a kid like me, of course, and like most kids, you weren't looking to be Lando Calrissian. You wanted to be Han Solo, but Lando Calrissian was the black guy. He was for you. As time went on, we were getting people coming to us from all over the world, and they were all pitching. I don't care if they were from Latin America, the Middle East. Every concept was just another Dragon Ball and Naruto clone, complete with Japanese-looking person. And I just got really frustrated with that. I felt like this is really ridiculous. I started thinking about creating something that would show that you can create legitimate manga style content and have diversity in it. And I thought, well, what's the most radical? And I had been reading at the time about Black Girls Code, and coming from the video game industry, coming from the tech industry, I was well aware of engineering issues with diversity. It was largely driven by men, largely driven by white men. And I created Clock Striker. I thought, great concept. Someone wants to be an engineer. What if you made the engineers like Jedi? They have a special purpose in what they do. But then let's go a step further than that. Let's make the lead character a girl. Let's make her a black girl. And at that point, then the story just became really electric, because now there's so many areas you could go with the story. There were so much things that you could do that had never been seen before. You'd never seen this black female character with dreads with this kind of really bright, colorful costume. I think we had a preview for it in issue 24. People had been supporting, hungry for more, and talking about Clock Striker since 2014, I think it was, or 2015 maybe. And then last but not least, Yellow Stringer was created because, again, we needed content for Saturday PM, which was our first big continuation of our Saturday AM brand. We'd always had creators pitching us really dark and mature series. So I wanted to create something that really felt like, and that meant mature characters. That meant stories that weren't slam bam action. And Yellow Stringer, the creator, Jeffrey John Louise, came from Summer of Manga. He wanted to work on a mystery, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He didn't really have a lot of experience. We came up with this concept. And the problem was that Jeffrey was very young at the time. He didn't know what newspapers were really. And so it took a couple of years for Jeffrey to really kind of get up to speed with it. And then I came back and just started writing stuff going forward, because it just felt like the potential was being lost. It was such a great concept. Basically, two people who work in a newspaper, their news stories are the stuff that I used to see in the newspaper. And it would basically be like Demon Baby found in Kansas, or Demon Heart is included in a box of Captain Crunches. It's always something really stupid and weird, but you would see those newspapers in grocery stores in the 80s, and you'd always just think how stupid it was. You're like, who buys this crap? And I would always think to myself, it would be amazing to be one of those reporters and the stuff is real you're reporting on. No one believes it is, and there's a story behind the story. For me, writing was more about proving that diversity could work in these stories. and showing the artists that I work with, but also the young people who are sending us content every summer for Summer of Manga, showing them that you can do this, that this is not this kind of weird thing. And the reason they couldn't do it is because they'd never seen it before. Now we're starting to see more of that. It's taken a few years, but Summer of Manga now does seem to get people submitting characters that are culturally and ethnically more representative of wherever they're from.
For those of you that don't know, Summer of Manga is Saturday AM's annual submission period where artists from around the world submit their portfolios for review. Out of hundreds of applicants, about 10 creators are selected to create one-shots that will run in Saturday AM's summer issues. Creators like Christina Andebach, Saren Ribity, and Liam Peng are all Summer of Manga alumni. Me and all of the guys at Saturday Afternoon are also alumni of Summer of Manga. This year's Summer of Manga event just wrapped up in issue 151. We had creators who were Vietnamese, African, Guatemalan, and Filipino. You can read this year's Summer of Manga one-shots by downloading the Saturday AM mobile app. Jumping into my comic book writing process, I like to create detailed scripts for every chapter of my manga. I try to plan out how panels will look on each page so I can roughly account for page limits. When I am scripting, I make notes of character expressions, actions, and dialogue. I also like to make a note of where each scene is taking place and indicating when the scene changes. I don't plan out my entire series from the start. I recommend creating an outline that lists out specific story beats that your story needs to hit. You should have a rough idea of where your series begins and ends. For me, story beats take the form of story arcs and minor antagonists. By having a rough idea where the story is heading, I have an easier time filling in the blanks and building up towards those big moments.
So my process for writing, I think, is pretty standard in the industry. Basically, in comic books, and I'm talking traditional Western comic books, there are really two processes to writing. There's more, to be clear, but there's two that are kind of recognized as being kind of the two standard ways to do it. One is kind of full script, and that's what you tend to get with big time writers, people like Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore. They write in like very detailed scripts, detailing all the things you're going to see, how the camera should be placed and everything, panel by panel by panel by panel by panel. Stan Lee, who wrote several books for Marvel Comics. So at one point, he was writing like 12 titles. And ultimately, what Stan Lee would do is he'd basically say, okay, here's the plot. Here's how the story starts. Here's what's got to happen in the middle for the twist. And then this is how it finishes. And then essentially the artist then basically crafted the story from there. And then Stan Lee would come back in, see what they did, and he would then script it from there. They call that the Marvel method. So you got the Marvel method and you got full scripts, which again is not a DC thing, but some of the biggest creators ever of DC Comics, that's how they worked. I tend to work in the middle of that format. Essentially, I talk to my artists and find out what they're in the mood for, but largely I drive the narrative. I tend to script the general outline of the narrative similar to Stan Lee and the Marvel method. But what Saturday strives to do is to reach the tenor or the rhythm of manga. I think about the fight sequences where fights move in a tic-tac-toe scenario. Even if the fight is more mental as opposed to physical, a la Death Note, there's always still that tic-tac-toe element. Manga is really good about that. So it's like there's a rhythm to manga. And I feel like for me, I do the DC method where I really want to capture those specific moments of manga, those specific things that can only be done in manga. I tend to work in this very fluid scenario where, again, I'm kind of giving a very general scenario so that the creators have some wiggle room, they have some leeway. But where I want them to really hit that rhythm correctly, I get very specific.
As a publisher and editor-in-chief, I'm sure you've had to review many different types of comics. Can you tell us what you are looking for when you're reading amateur scripts and manga pitches?
Number one, it's black, brown kids creating Japanese characters. These folks have never been to Japan, don't speak Japanese, so that they're creating these characters. They're giving these kind of Japanese tropes. Number two, it's the big eyes, spiky hair. Number three is that they're trying to create these manga epics. My question always is, who is this for? Why are you dragging out this idea? And then when you read it, you get the tropes, right? There'll be the overexpression face, the loud mouth, squirrely eyes when they're crying or emotional. There'll be the speed lines. The thing that always stands out to me is that when I do see some of their work is that, again, it just feels very old school. It feels very circa 2013.
When you are a creator, you sometimes run into what is known as a block. For artists, an artist block is a period where you are unable to draw. For writers, writer's block is a period when you are unable to write or come up with new ideas. I am a big advocate for taking breaks when you are experiencing blocks. When you are a creative, taking care of your mental health should come first. It can be hard to take breaks when you are working under a deadline, but you need to take care of yourself first before you put all of yourself into your work. Building up stress can lead to what is known as burnout. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. As someone who currently writes 3 different comic book series, can you tell us about your experience dealing with writer's block?
You know, I have the benefit of, first of all, not taking everything so seriously. I think oftentimes one of the things I try to tell a lot of our folks at Saturday AM is to not take the stuff super seriously. I mean, the biggest thing I think that professional comic creators enjoy is the fact that they understand that this is a job. And I think the biggest problem that a lot of independent comic creators have on Webtoons and these places is that while this certainly feels like a job, many of them treat it like a job. If it ain't paying your bills, it's really not a job. And so from that standpoint, it becomes this kind of problem where it's like you're putting too much of you on the line for something that's not really returning that type of investment. And as a result of that, you've got to put this in a proper context of what matters. You can't make any money if you don't have a fan base. And some platforms like Webtoon and Tapas and other groups, it's a different model, right? It's like create the content, and then a lot of people eventually check it out, will then add you to this payment structure because people are checking out the ads or getting the ads, and we're making money that way. That's great. It's not a guarantee. Nothing is, by the way, but it's not a guarantee. So therefore, it's not our business model. So I have the benefit of understanding, this is a business, and I'm trying to make Saturday AM very distinctive and very successful and really connect with audiences who've never seen diverse manga, to make diverse manga. And so because of that, when I create Clock Striker, when I create Yellow Stringer, when I create these titles and I write them, I'd never get as invested with myself in it because I'm more interested and excited about what the fans are going to see and what they're going to experience through the story. And that means that the blocks I have occasionally, I can really kind of like not let myself get too invested in like, oh, what's going to happen next? Oh, God, I really don't like the scene. Instead, it's more like, hey, dude, we got to get this chapter done. What's going to be the most exciting way to get to this next step? This is going to be really exciting. For me to like take the story here and finish on this cliffhanger is really exciting. It's going to really get people talking. And that's what I want to have from a business standpoint. I guarantee you that's how the Shonen Jump authors and the Weekly Shonen Manga authors and the Weekly Shonen Sunday authors and so on, I'm sure that's how they feel as well. Because when you're on a deadline, you got to get stuff out. You don't have the luxury of being like, I really want this to be perfect. Let's see, I'm going to do this and do this. You got to get the stuff done. So you've got to make concessions, and you become comfortable making those concessions in the pursuit of just a really fun story that's going to excite your fan base. Nobody needs your manga to live a good life. They need the power bill, they need electricity, they need water, they need groceries, they need their car or some sort of transportation, but they don't need your manga. That sort of acceptance among young creators, I think, really kind of helps ground them in the fact that, look, I mean, what I'm doing is a privilege to do, but also at the same time, like, it's a zero-sum game. Like, it's not going to benefit me initially, most likely. It's going to be something where I got to do it for the love of it and hope that I'm in a position that I either get really significant enough, get really popular enough, or work with the right group that sees value in what I'm doing, is willing to pay me something that allows me to actually make this something that is closer to a full-time job or something that I can do for a living. Because of sites like Webtoon and Tapas, I hear young people all the time who've never produced a comic work, who've never had success producing comics, who are like, start talking crap about companies like, I don't work for free. And it's like, you're not working. Who's dying for your content? No one asked for your content. You want to be a part of this industry, not the other way around. The industry's not asking you to join it. At some point, you've got to recognize it, like, you've got to do the work. You've got to demonstrate that you are valuable enough to be rewarded for this content. And no creator should be exploited. But at the same time, the idea that everyone is at the same level is just crazy in entertainment of all places. So young creators, I think, sometimes get too much in their head with this stuff, and it really affects them. And I feel bad when I see that, because to let a job you're not getting paid for destroy you is insane. This notion of letting yourself be destroyed mentally and emotionally, you got writers like all these things because you haven't quite been able to create that fan base. Social media helps with that to some degree, but even then, that's still really difficult. So to let yourself be emotionally and mentally wrecked because of what appears to be unfair or appears to be like this block on things, rather than just enjoying the experience of doing it and just allowing yourself to be happy with what you've created and then to let it go.
Online, I often see aspiring comic book writers advertise themselves on social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I have even been approached by aspiring manga writers who wanted me to illustrate their story. While this necessarily isn't a bad thing, I think a lot of these quote-unquote aspiring manga writers are not actually writers. In the past, when I had to deal with aspiring comic writers sliding into my DMs, I would ask to see a portfolio of their past work. Most of the time, they had nothing to show. In a similar vein, I sometimes see aspiring comic writers in my YouTube comments who say they cannot start working on a comic, manga, or webtoon story until they find an artist.
It really belies not taking this craft seriously. If you're a writer, then you write. It doesn't matter if you have an artist or not. If you're a writer, you write. It's not about having an artist. Like I tell writers all the time when I hear that question, do you think the artists that you would hope to get to work with you, do you think that they don't have ideas? Because that's all right now you're telling me that you have. And you're a fan who has an idea. That's it. Because if you're telling me you need an artist to tell your story, then you're not a writer. No writer needs an artist to tell a story. Writers can write without an artist. Every artist has an idea. I would just say that whenever I hear that, that's almost grounds for disqualification right there, because it proves that you're not really serious about being a writer. All you've got to do, if you're a writer, you don't have anything written down, you can't produce stories without a comic book artist, is pay the comic book artist. And then you will have your great comic book idea come out. writers should be willing to write. Impress the artists. Write articles for websites. Write articles for your blog. Have like a year worth of blog posts you've written to demonstrate that you can write. Don't send them posts you made on Facebook. I mean, set up a blog and write blog posts. Write about everything to prove that you actually have the ability to string together sentences and tell a story. Write novels. Write plays. Write light novels. Write scripts for comic books that whether or not you have an artist, you can still read the script and go, man, I would love to see this illustrated. You've got to demonstrate that you can be a writer.
That is the best way to sell yourself to a potential artist who you're looking to partner with. There are plenty of comic book publishers that look for talented writers. Take this time to build your portfolio, build your social media presence, and connect with more artists and writers doing the same thing as you. In a field as competitive as comics, you have to pave your own way for yourself. That brings us to the end of today's video. I want to take this moment to thank Fred, the CEO of Saturday AM, for taking the time to join me in today's video.
Yeah, so thank you very much for checking out this episode. Thanks to Michael for inviting me onto his channel. We do hope you'll support Saturday AM. You can, of course, find us www.saturday-am.com. We hope that you'll support our graphic novel program through Corto Group. You can find our books in stores, like I said, around the world, whether it's Walmart, Barnes & Noble's, Books A Million here in America, Amazon, of course, Drymock in Australia, Indigo bookstores in Canada, W.H. Smith and Waterstones in the UK, and a host of other places. If you want to stay current with all the great things happening within our manga, then follow us on social media, and then likewise, check out our app. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I'm super excited by all the wonderful young talent that's out there. Stay tuned for some great stuff coming soon from Saturday AM. Take care.